Hi there, and welcome to Mr. Lehan Teaches You Stuff. This is Grade 10 Optics Lesson 2, Color Theories. So the first thing we're going to look at is what colors are. So colors are actually defined by the wavelength they have. So you may remember from the last video that visible light is just a certain section of the electromagnetic spectrum with certain wavelengths. Well, each color has its own wavelength. That's what defines it. So red has a wavelength of about 700 nanometers. Orange is 600 nanometers. Yellow is 580 nanometers. Green is 550. Blue 450. And violet 400. So as we get closer to violet, and even when we go beyond violet into ultraviolet, you'll see that the wavelengths are getting shorter and shorter and shorter. This means that they're getting sort of higher energy as you go down there. So the shorter the wavelength, the more energy it has. Bending light. So prisms will separate white light into its component parts. So if you want to see the colors of light, if you put light through a prism, it will refract sort of at a different rate, all the different colors, and they'll separate out, and you end up with a rainbow. So light will be bent to different degrees based on its wavelength. So because each color has its own wavelength, it gets bent to a different degree. And because it's being bent to a different degree, it separates out from the other colors of light, and you end up with a rainbow coming out the other side of the prism. Basically the same thing happens with rainbows in the sky. What's happening is light is entering a raindrop. It's kind of separating a little bit as it bounces around in there. And then when it exits the raindrop, it's been split out into its different colors, and we end up seeing a rainbow, provided we're at the correct angle relative to the light and the rain. Alright, we'll talk about mixing colors. We are used to mixing colors. I assume you're used to mixing colors with paint or pencil crayons. With the three primary colors that we learned about in grade school, which are red, yellow, and blue. So we know that if we mix red and yellow, for instance, we'll end up with orange. Right? These are things that we generally learned when we were little. However, when it comes to light, colors aren't quite the same. The colors of light work differently, and they actually have different primary colors. This is a little confusing for some people. So if we look at additive colors, the additive color theory, our three primary colors are red, green, and blue. And when you mix red, green, and blue, you end up with white. So this isn't, mixing a green pencil crayon with a blue pencil crayon to make cyan. This is adding different colors of light together. So if you have spotlights, that are different colors, they have different colored gels on them or whatever, and you're projecting those spotlights on a screen or on a stage, you'll see this. Also, the monitor, the screen that you're watching this on, uses additive color theory. So it's going to have red, green, and blue pixels that make up the colors you see. Now if you mix two of these primary colors, red, green, and blue, you get secondary colors such as magenta, cyan, and yellow. So you can see those on the picture on the left here. When we cross green and blue, we get cyan. When we cross green and red, we get yellow. And this is a little counterintuitive, but here I have a big red circle and a big green circle being projected onto a screen. And if I move the projectors so that they overlap, the green and the red, you'll see that we do indeed get yellow in the middle. So as I mentioned before, RGB is the primary color model used by screens. So the screen you're using right now to view this video uses RGB. And RGB, of course, stands for red, green, and blue. Now, if you look at our little picture here that says RGB, you've got a red R, green G, and a blue B on sort of a whitish background. If we actually zoom in on that and see what it actually looks like up close, you'll see that the white background is actually red, green, and blue all together. And then the R, the G, and the B each have their own color And this is basically how all the screens work. The screen you're viewing this on right now only has red, green, and blue. But if you vary how bright the colors are and which colors are beside each other, you can alter what color people perceive when they look at that screen. Now, it's not entirely obvious right away how it is we can perceive colors such as yellow, orange, or cyan on our computer screens if we only have red, green, and blue pixels. The reason we can see these is because our eyes have specialized cells in them called cone cells. And these cone cells only sense red, green, and blue light. So this one on the far right senses red light, this one senses green light, and this one senses blue light. So if they detect light in their wavelength, they'll send a signal to the brain saying, I see this sort of intensity and wavelength of color. Now the wavelength of the light sensed by the cell determines what color our eyes see. So if you have something that's yellow, your brain will pick up on it using its red cone cells and its green cone cells. So we can see that this is lined up with the yellow part of the spectrum. Our red cone cells senses that there's this amount of energy, and our green cone cell senses there's this amount of energy. And then a signal gets sent to our brain from both of these cone cells, and then the brain interprets the two signals coming in and says, oh, that color must be yellow. So it says, you know, what you are looking at is yellow, but the signal actually going to your brain is actually a little bit of red and a little bit of green. So that's why we can trick our brains with RGB screens to say, you know, the thing you are looking at right now, like the word yellow here surrounded by yellow color, is not actually yellow. It's a little bit of green and a little bit of red. In fact, if you take a magnifying glass or a microscope right now and hold it up to your computer screen, if it's powerful enough, you'll be able to see that your computer or your phone or whatever you're watching this on is actually showing you a little bit of green pixels and a bit of red pixels, and you're interpreting it as yellow. So now we'll take a look at the subtractive color theory. The subtractive color theory is here to explain why things are the colors they are. So while the additive color theory was to explain how it is computer screens work, how televisions work, and how your computer monitor shows you colors, subtractive color theory is all about the colors of physical objects, things in the real world. So let's just imagine you're in a dark room. There are no windows, no lights, and you hold a leaf up in front of your face. What would you see? Well, if there's no light at all, you wouldn't see anything, right? You need light to be able to see things. So if you let some light in, some nice white light, just regular light from the sun, when that white light hits the leaf, it's not just white light, really. It's all the colors of the rainbow are in that light, right? White light is composed of every single color. When it hits that leaf is either going to absorb or reflect the colors. So if it's a green leaf, it's going to absorb red and yellow and blue and violet. It's going to absorb all the colors except for green. The green gets reflected into your eye, and that is what we see. So the reflected colors are the ones that we actually see. So the subtractive color theory is the opposite of the additive color theory. The primary colors are cyan, magenta, and yellow, while the secondary colors are red, green, and blue. So here you can see if you take magenta and yellow and mix them together, you'll get red. If you take cyan and yellow together, you make green, and cyan and magenta together make blue. So if you are printing something, you will use the subtractive color theory. So if we look at printing, printing usually has 4 different layers to it. It's got cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, or key. And they use all 4 of these layers to create all the colors you need for a print of some sort. So whether this is printing a photo or printing a color page out of your printer, or even printing something on a t-shirt, they'll use CMYK as their basis. So I'll show you an example of this. Here's a photograph that's been separated out into its 4 different layers. It's got cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. If we combine these back together, so there's the blue and the magenta together, we'll add the yellow, and then we'll add in the black, and there we have a nice beautiful photo that looks normal. If you ever look at the colors that printers usually use, so when you're buying your printer ink, if you look at the colors, they use cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And putting those together in certain amounts, you end up having a photograph printed or a sticker or whatever it is you're printing. But that's the color model or color theory used in printing. Whereas if it's just on a screen, they use the RGB color model. So that's it for this video. Tune in for the next video on light sources.